In 1971, Amtrak inherited nothing but rust and bad press. So when they spotted a futuristic French train powered by Turbomeca Turbo 3 helicopter engines, machines built for flight, not old US rails, they thought they'd found salvation. These jet trains were sold as silver bullets, capable of 125 miles per hour, and they sounded like the future. But when they hit neglected American tracks during the worst oil crisis in history, reality bit back. The turbines burned through money, they caused roof fires, and even $185 million could not resurrect a dream designed for someone else's world. Why did the promise of a miracle turn into one of rail's most expensive disasters? Congress created Amtrak in 1971 with a single desperate goal: keep passenger trains running in a country that had already moved on. The private railroads wanted out. Their stations were empty, their cars were relics, and their engines belonged in a museum. Amtrak's first inventory looked like a scrapyard: E units and F units built for another era, steam-heated coaches that leaked in the rain, and a maintenance backlog that stretched back decades. Every part was worn thin, every train was a gamble. The public had stopped caring. Airlines like TWA and Pan Am whisked travelers from coast to coast in hours. The interstates were packed with shiny new Chevrolets and Fords. In the eyes of most Americans, trains were for people with no better options. Amtrak's first year was spent begging Congress for enough money to patch together schedules and keep the lights on. No one wanted to ride. No one wanted to work there. The only constant was the sound of another engine failing somewhere out on the line. Survival was the day-to-day work. Inside the shops, the mechanics did what they could. Spare parts were scavenged from other railroads. Some cars had been built before World War II. There were no blueprints for half the repairs. The new Amtrak logo was slapped onto old paint, but the smell of oil and rust never left. The best anyone could say was that the train still moved sometimes. The worst was that the whole operation looked doomed from the start. But Washington wanted a miracle. Amtrak needed something flashy, something that looked like the future. The bosses talked about a halo car, a train that would make headlines, not just limp along. No one in the back shops believed a new paint job would change anything, but politicians were hungry for ribbon cuttings and photo ops. They wanted a silver bullet, not another patch on the boiler. That is when the idea of importing foreign technology took hold, and the search for salvation turned overseas. The result was a leap of faith. Instead of fixing the rails or modernizing the fleet, Amtrak's leadership went shopping for something that would dazzle the public and buy them time with Congress. They were not thinking about the nuts and bolts. They were thinking about headlines. The promise of speed and style, anything to make people forget just how much of the railroad was held together by hope and borrowed parts. Across the Atlantic, a different dream was taking shape. In northern France, engineers at ANF were building something that looked like science fiction, a train that seemed to float. The RTG, rame a turbine, a gas, was nothing like the hulking diesels rusting away in American yards. Its body was a blend of aluminum and high-strength steel, shaped for the wind. The nose was sharp and purposeful, slicing through the air instead of pushing it aside. Science. But the real marvel lay under the hood. Instead of a rowdy diesel engine, the RTG was powered by two Turbomeca Turbo 3 turbines, the same engines bolted to the sides of the Aerospatiale Super Frelon helicopter. This was not just a train with an airplane heart. It was a jet on rails, each turbine putting out 1,140 horsepower, spinning at a scream instead of a rumble. The sound was a high-pitched whine, not the throb of pistons, but a rising, insistent note that could be heard long before the train flashed past. The engineers had aimed high. On the test tracks outside Lille, the RTG ran at 125 miles per hour, sometimes even faster. The power-to-weight ratio made old American diesels look like steam tractors by comparison. Everything was designed for speed: the lightness of the alloy body, the low-slung suspension, the aerodynamic fairings that tucked away every bolt and seam. Inside, The ride was smooth and quiet, at least until you opened a window and caught the turbine's howl. Speed. Translating jet thrust into wheel motion took a piece of technology borrowed from heavy industry, a hydraulic gearbox the size of a refrigerator. It was built to handle the turbine's constant output, turning relentless spin into the back and forth push that trains need to get moving and stop again. In France, where the rails were straight and the ballast was clean, the gearbox was a masterpiece. The whole train could leap from a standstill to full speed in less time than it took a conductor to check tickets. Every detail felt like a rebuke to the tired, patched-together cars limping along in the States. The RTG was proof that trains did not have to be slow, heavy, or old. It ran with the urgency of the jet age, a streak of silver and orange against the green countryside. For a moment, it seemed like the future had arrived. If you listened to the turbines whine, you could almost believe it. In 1973, just as the new turboliners rolled out, the world's oil supply was thrown into chaos. OPEC slammed the door on exports, and the price of fuel quadrupled almost overnight. For Amtrak, the timing could not have been worse. The Turbomeca Turbo 3 turbines, the exact same engines used in the Aerospatiale Super Frelon helicopter, were hungry by design. On paper, they delivered over 1,000 horsepower each, but in practice, they burned fuel at a rate that made the accountants sweat. At full throttle, the turbines drank like a jetliner on takeoff. At idle, they barely did any better. Every minute spent waiting at a station meant dollars pouring out the exhaust. Diesel engines of the era converted about 35% of their fuel into motion. The turbines struggled to hit 20%, sometimes less if the train was not moving fast enough to keep the turbines in their sweet spot. The difference showed up on every fuel bill. Internal memos from Amtrak's finance office in 1974 warned that gas turbine trains were costing more than double their diesel counterparts just to keep moving. The numbers did not lie. The promise of futuristic speed turned into a line item labeled operating loss. The reality on the ground was even harsher. The Turboliner's sleek design made it look like a bargain, but every trip across the Midwest was a losing bet. The trains were built for 125 miles per hour, but American tracks, warped, patched, and rough, capped them at 79 miles per hour. That meant the turbines were always running below their most efficient range, burning more fuel for the same slow crawl as the old diesels they were supposed to replace. The public saw a modern train. The maintenance chief saw invoices stacking up and fuel bills that made no sense. It was like buying a racehorse and keeping it in your living room. All that power, all that promise, wasted because the system around it could not keep up. The Turboliners became a symbol of mismatch, where every mile cost more than Amtrak could afford. The dream of high-speed rail was now shackled to the price of oil, and the pain was just beginning. The Turboliners arrived with the promise of speed, but the rails underneath told a different story. Federal Railroad Administration rules capped their top speed at 79 miles per hour, no matter how much horsepower the turbines could muster. The tracks between Chicago and St. Louis had not seen serious maintenance since the Second World War. Welds were rough, rails were uneven, and every joint sent a shudder through the cars. The suspension, designed for the glass-smooth lines of France, began to rattle itself apart. Bearings wore out early. The hydraulic gearboxes, built to transfer the relentless spin of two Turbomeca Turbo 3 helicopter engines to the wheels, developed leaks and pressure drops. Mechanics found themselves waiting weeks for metric parts to arrive from overseas just to get a train rolling again. Then there was the heat. The turbines vented their exhaust straight up through the roof, blasting a column of hot air that shimmered in the sun. On a good day, it was a heat haze. On a bad day, it was a fire hazard. Leaves and debris collected on the roof or in the overhead wires, and more than once, the exhaust ignited them. Incident logs from the late 1980s and early 1990s record one fire at Penn Station in 1994 that forced an evacuation and left charred panels behind. The maintenance crews called it the flamethrower effect. You could smell burnt paint and scorched insulation long after the fire was out. When the turboliners were shifted to New York's Empire Corridor, a new layer of complexity was added. The tunnels into Grand Central and Penn Station did not allow gas turbines to run. The solution was to retrofit the trains into RTLs with a dual-mode system. The turbines would shut down, and the train would switch to third-rail electric power for the final miles into the city. In theory, it was a clever workaround. In practice, it meant even more parts to break, more manuals to misplace, and more headaches for the people keeping the trains alive. The wiring harnesses for the third rail shoes tangled with the turbine controls. Every switchover was a gamble. If the electric mode failed, the train could stall in a tunnel, and the only way out was a tow. By the mid-1990s, the turboliners were running out of time. The suspensions were battered, the transmissions unreliable, and the risk of another roof fire was always in the back of everyone's mind. Amtrak started looking for ways to get rid of them, but the politicians were not ready to let go. Instead, they promised a fix, a plan to rebuild the old French trains into something new. For the people in the shops, it felt like being told to patch a sinking ship with duct tape and hope for the best. New York State did not want to admit defeat. In the late 1990s, with the turboliners battered and Amtrak eager to be rid of them, Governor George Pataki's administration doubled down. Instead of investing in new trains or fixing the tracks, Albany handed Supersteel, a local firm in Schenectady, a contract worth over $70 million, eventually ballooning far beyond that according to state audits. The mission was to strip the French-built relics down to their frames and rebuild them as modern high-speed trains for the Empire Corridor. The promise was simple: faster trips between New York City and Albany, a showpiece for state leadership, and a headline-grabbing revival of American passenger rail. On paper, it sounded like progress. In reality, the project was a slow-motion disaster. The rebuilds dragged on for years, dogged by engineering snags and endless delays. Supersteel struggled to retrofit decades-old turbines and hydraulic gearboxes to meet new standards. Air conditioning systems failed. Seating was reconfigured, then reconfigured again. Each attempt to modernize the trains uncovered new problems: wiring incompatible with American parts, metric bolts that did not fit US tools, and manuals that seemed to have been written for another planet. Every fix cost more than the last. By the time the first rebuilt train rolled out in 2002, it was already years late. Amtrak was not impressed. The new turbines burned even more fuel than before, and the trains still could not outrun the 79 miles per hour speed limit imposed by the same old tracks. Air conditioning failures left passengers sweating in summer. The seating arrangements were so cramped that even short trips felt punishing. Amtrak refused to accept the new trains, citing problems with reliability, comfort, and cost. The state and the railroad blamed each other in court. Lawsuits flew back and forth. New York accused Amtrak of sabotage, while Amtrak argued the trains were unusable and the promised track upgrades never materialized. The result was an expensive stalemate. 3 rebuilt turboliners, each a Frankenstein's monster of French aerospace parts and American patchwork, sat idle in a storage yard in Delaware. 4 more never made it out of the shop. The state had poured more than $100 million into the project. The only thing left to show for it was a row of silent, unwanted trains baking in the sun, waiting for a final tow to the scrapyard. In the end, the great promise of the Turboliner saga came down to a line item in an auction ledger. After decades of political speeches, engineering experiments, and lawsuits that filled legal pads from Albany to Washington, the last of the rebuilt trains sat in a Delaware yard, silent and sun-bleached. 3 completed RTL-3 trains, each the product of years of labor and millions in taxpayer dollars, were sold off for scrap in 2012. The final recovery was $420,000. Not per train, total. That is less than 0.25% of what New York State had sunk into the rebuild program. The original contract with Supersteel started at $74 million, ballooned with overruns, and ended with a payout that would not buy a single new passenger car. 4 more half-finished sets had already been cut up and carted away years earlier, their remains worth more as raw metal than as rolling stock. The math is almost too ugly to say out loud. $185 million spent on a project that produced nothing but lawsuits and storage bills, traded for less than the price of a luxury condo in Manhattan. The paperwork from the sale reads like a punchline: the disposition of obsolete rolling stock. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just a check written by the scrap dealer and a few more pages in the state list of losses. For the people who kept the trains running, who ordered metric bolts from France, who patched scorched insulation after another roof fire, the ending was not a surprise. The politicians got their headlines, the contractors got paid, the public got a bill, and the railroad got nothing but empty sheds and a lesson in what happens when you try to buy the future without fixing the foundation. The only thing left of the Turboliner dream was the echo of a turbine whine and a balance sheet that still smells like burnt money. Today, America still debates high-speed rail while outdated tracks hold the nation back. Every time policymakers promise a quick fix, the lesson remains: no amount of imported innovation can outrun neglected infrastructure. Until we invest in the basics, billion-dollar dreams will keep ending up in the scrapyard. The price of ignoring the groundwork isn't just lost money, it's lost futures. What do you think it takes to finally get this right?